CBS News has confirmed that hundreds of U.S. Special Forces are now in the Middle East as President Trump weighs next steps for.
The most dangerous boats in the Persian Gulf are not the ones carrying missiles. They are the ones trying to make America fire first. At 2:17 in the morning, somewhere near the Strait of Hormuz, U.S. destroyers issued what naval crews call the last line before violence.
Turn away. Alter course. Do not approach.
But the Iranian speedboats kept coming. 3 open questions were now hanging over the water. Who sent them into the kill zone? Why did Washington stay almost silent afterward? And why did the boats turn back only after it was already too late? Because the real weapon that night was not on the boats. It was behind them. Watch the map closely. The Strait of Hormuz is only about 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. Through that thin strip of water moves roughly 1/5 of the world's oil. Tankers from Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iraq, Qatar, and the UAE all squeeze through the same maritime throat. And guarding that throat is the U.S. Fifth Fleet, headquartered in Bahrain.
On paper, this is not a fair fight.
An Arleigh Burke-class destroyer carries Aegis radar, vertical launch missiles, 5-inch guns, electronic warfare systems, helicopters, and sensors that can track threats far beyond the horizon. Iranian speedboats are small, exposed, and cheap. That is exactly why they are dangerous. Because Tehran is not trying to win a traditional naval battle. It is trying to make one impossible. The impossible situation begins with distance. A speedboat moving at 45 knots can close a mile in barely over a minute. In open ocean, that is nothing. In the Strait of Hormuz, surrounded by civilian tankers, fishing dhows, oil platforms, and radar clutter, it is everything. A destroyer commander has seconds to decide whether a fast-moving contact is posturing, probing, or preparing to die. And Iran knows this. For years, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy has built its Gulf strategy around swarm pressure. Not aircraft carriers.
Not blue water fleets.
Not a direct duel with the U.S. Navy.
Small boats. Dozens of them.
Spread out, accelerating, turning, circling, vanishing into civilian traffic, then appearing again at the worst possible angle. This is not random harassment. It is choreography. At 1:30 on the board, the first rehook appears. Why would Iran risk losing boats it knows cannot survive a U.S. destroyer's weapons? The answer begins with a number, 600. That is roughly the number of small vessels and fast attack craft Iran can mobilize across different maritime units, depending on readiness and classification.
Not all are elite.
Not all are missile-equipped. But they do not need to be. They need to force hesitation. A billion-dollar warship cannot simply open fire every time a small craft approaches. The sea is too crowded. The optics are too explosive. And one mistake could turn a tactical incident into a global oil shock before sunrise. So the destroyer waits.
It warns. It tracks. It records.
The speedboats know the ritual. Radio warnings.
Bridge-to-bridge calls.
Flare signals.
Maneuvering. More warnings. Then the line. The final warning.
And this is where the night changed. Because the Iranian boats did not simply approach head-on.
They approached in a pattern. One group came in fast.
Another drifted wider. A third stayed farther back, almost lazy, as if observing. That third group mattered. Remember that. The obvious story is that Iran was testing American nerves. That is true, but it is only the first layer. The second layer is more dangerous. Iran was testing the American decision chain. How many warnings before weapons unlock? How close can a boat get before the destroyer changes formation? Which radar bands light up? Which helicopter launches? Which electronic systems activate? Every warning is also a signal. Every evasive turn is data. Every second of delay tells Tehran something about the American threshold.
At 2:15, the board widens.
This was never just about boats. On the Iranian coast sit missile batteries, drones, coastal radars, mobile launchers, and command posts hidden among ports, islands, and hardened terrain.
Abu Musa, Keshem, Bandar Abbas.
The names barely appear in headlines, but on military maps they are pressure points. From these positions, Iran does not need to sink the U.S. Navy. It only needs to make the strait feel unsafe. Insurance rates rise. Tanker traffic slows.
Brent crude jumps.
Asian importers call Washington. Gulf monarchies demand reassurance. And suddenly, 10 boats that cost less than one American missile have moved markets. That is asymmetric warfare.
Not victory. Leverage.
The destroyers understood this. So did the commanders watching from Fifth Fleet headquarters. But the men on the bridge still had the same problem.
A boat was closing. Then another. Then another.
At 3,000 yards, the threat is serious. At 1,500 yards, it becomes urgent. At under 1,000 yards, the margin collapses. A destroyer's crew does not have the luxury of debating geopolitics when a small craft might carry rockets, mines, explosives, or a suicide team. This is the cruel math of the Gulf. If you fire too early, you may start a war. If you fire too late, you may bury sailors.
Then came the turn.
The Iranian boats finally broke off. To the public, that sounds like de-escalation.
It wasn't.
Because by the time they turned back, the encounter had already achieved its first objective. The destroyer had shown its hand. Which sensors tracked which boat? Which weapons were trained? Which radio channels were used? How long the warning ladder took? How quickly nearby assets reacted? The boats escaped the kill zone, but the information did not.
Silence.
That is why Washington's response was measured. Not because nothing happened.
Because too much happened.
When the Pentagon speaks loudly after an incident like this, it can accidentally confirm the very thing Iran wants to know. It can reveal timing, procedures, positions, even emotional temperature. A sharp press statement can become free intelligence. So Washington often says less than viewers expect. A dangerous maneuver.
An unsafe approach. A professional response. Dry words.
But behind those dry words, planners are asking a darker question. Was this an isolated provocation? Or was it the first move in a sequence? Because Iran rarely plays one piece at a time. At 3:45, the hidden player enters. Not the speedboat commander. Not even the local IRGC patrol leader. The hidden player is the network. The men who matter may not have been on the water at all. They may have been inside a coastal operations room, watching feeds from radar, drones, lookouts, and commercial tracking systems, building a picture of how an American destroyer behaves under pressure. That picture is worth more than the boats. Because if the next crisis comes with missiles, drones, or mines, Tehran already knows where the seams are. This is the part most headlines miss. A swarm does not have to attack.
It can rehearse. It can map. It can provoke.
It can make a superpower reveal the rules of engagement without ever crossing the line that guarantees war. And that is the genius and danger of Iran's Gulf strategy. The boats are expendable.
The pattern is not.
Now the delayed reveal. The speedboats turned back too late because the real escalation had already moved from the water to the air. During incidents like this, US ships are not only watching the boats. They are watching the sky, the coast, the electromagnetic spectrum, and the shipping lanes. A small boat approach can be used to mask something else: a drone repositioning, a radar activation, a missile battery coming online, a mine-laying vessel moving under civilian cover, or a command node testing American reactions. The boat is the distraction.
The coast is the blade.
This is why one destroyer is never just one destroyer in the Gulf. It is part of a layered system: satellites, maritime patrol aircraft, helicopters, allied radars, Gulf bases, and command centers stretching from Bahrain to Qatar to Diego Garcia. But layered systems have a weakness. They create many ways to misread a signal.
A boat turns. A drone appears. A radar locks. A tanker changes course.
A commander sees fragments and has to decide what they mean before the enemy decides for him. That is the game Tehran plays.
Ambiguity at speed.
And America's problem is that escalation in the Gulf does not move like a chess match. It moves like electricity. One shot near Hormuz can travel through oil markets in seconds, through diplomatic channels in minutes, through military alert systems in hours, and through domestic politics by morning. That is why the next 72 hours matter. Not because one speedboat encounter guarantees war.
It does not.
But because after every incident, both sides quietly reposition. Iran studies the American response. The US adjusts patrol routes. Gulf states increase alerts. Insurers reprice risk. Tankers change behavior. And somewhere, a commander on the next watch inherits a slightly more dangerous sea. By 12 minutes into the story, Loop 2 begins to close. Washington stayed quiet because silence is also deterrence. It denies Tehran a propaganda victory, avoids locking American leaders into a public red line, and prevents the release of details that could help the next swarm.
But silence has a cost.
To allies, it can look like weakness. To Iran, it can look like hesitation. To the market, it can look like uncertainty. And uncertainty is Iran's favorite weapon. That is why the Gulf is not controlled by who has the largest navy. It is controlled by who can manage risk better. The US can destroy Iran's conventional naval assets quickly. That is not the question. The question is whether it can do so without triggering missile strikes, tanker seizures, mine warfare, proxy attacks in Iraq and Syria, drone launches from Yemen, and a political crisis in every capital that depends on Gulf energy. Tehran cannot win a naval war,
but it can widen one. That is the trap.
At the point of maximum tension, imagine the destroyer bridge.
Dark water, multiple contacts,
radio warnings unanswered, a civilian tanker 5 miles away,
a helicopter crew waiting,
a gun crew tracking through night optics, a commander holding a decision that could kill men in seconds and move oil prices before dawn. The boat keeps closing. The warning goes out again.
Final warning. No poetry now. No strategy paper.
Only range, speed, bearing. Then the Iranian boats turn.
Too late for what? Too late to attack? Maybe. Too late to gather the data? No.
Too late to keep the crisis local? Absolutely. Because the second the US destroyer reached the final warning stage, the encounter entered a different category. It became a message to every actor watching the Gulf. To Iran, we are close to firing. To allies, the line is real. To markets, the strait is vulnerable. To commanders, next time may not end with a turn. And next time is the part nobody wants to say out loud. What if the boat does not turn? What if one captain misreads the warning? What if a drone appears at the same time? What if a tanker is hit hours later, making the destroyer incident look like the opening move? This is how wars begin in narrow waters. Not with a declaration.
With seconds. With a radar contact.
With a commander who has no perfect choice. Now the full picture becomes clear. The Iranian speedboats were not trying to defeat US destroyers. They were trying to compress American decision-making into a few hundred yards of water. They were trying to measure the line between restraint and force. They were trying to prove that in the Strait of Hormuz, a cheap boat can force an expensive empire to blink, aim, warn, and reveal. And when they turned back, the world heard the smallest part of the story.
No shots fired. No casualties. No war.
But the people who understand naval warfare heard something else.
A threshold was tested.
A pattern was recorded.
A future crisis was rehearsed.
That is why the title is not about boats turning away. It is about boats turning away too late. Too late to erase the warning. Too late to hide the choreography. Too late to pretend the Gulf is stable. Because the next confrontation may not come with 10 boats in the dark. It may come with a disabled tanker, a drone over a destroyer, a missile battery warming up on the coast, and a phone call to Washington asking one question no president wants before sunrise.
Do we fire first?
And if the answer is yes, the real battle will not begin in the Strait of Hormuz. It will begin everywhere connected to it.
Oil terminals, air bases, proxy fronts, shipping lanes, capitals, markets.
The speedboats were only the opening move. The next move may already be on the board.